Planning Commission meeting. Welcome to those in the Morgan City offices, those here on Zoom, and those as well that are streaming the video live on YouTube. Just for your information, this session will be recorded for future reference and available on the Morgan City website. We will start off our meeting tonight by reviewing the minutes from our March meeting. And at this point, I would ask for members of the commission who have spent time reviewing those minutes, if they're in a spot where you can move that those be finalized into the record.
Nate, I had maybe one item we ought to look at.
Sure.
Page 3, the very top sentence. It says, Steve Garside stated the city does not care. I wonder if that should be carry. How did you know we didn't care there, Steve?
Ouch.
Subliminal message.
I promise I had pointed that out to Teresa just to either just cover myself or hoping that that's not exactly what I said. That's not how I felt. I am sure of that.
Yeah, you may have wanted, that may have been the intention. I just wanted to make sure.
We're going to watch the video just to make sure.
It's often that my head and my mouth do not connect, so I apologize.
That's a great call out, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, that one changes the meaning of the sentence, doesn't it?
It definitely does. All right, so that's one observation of something we should correct as before we accept these minutes. Others.
Mr. Chair, if there's not any other questions or changes, I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Justin. Is there a second on the motion? Thanks, Jim. I see your hand. Hopefully I can see everyone. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Looks like unanimous. Thank you. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight, and we'll cover them in this order. We're going to, and by the way, all of these items are items that have come up as far as discussion from previous projects that have come before the commission that had garnered interest in revisiting how the code is written and maybe looking at opportunities to continue to improve upon that code. So that's our task before us tonight. We don't have necessarily any applicants that have come before us for any agenda items, but we'll focus on these 3. The first one, we'll be looking at amending some of the residential zones. Based on a particular code in 10.14.070. So we'll look at those zones and tables. After that, we'll discuss mixed use. Both of these items came up with respect to some of our conversation last month. So we'll go ahead and move into those straight away. Let's start with item number 1 and change my screen here. Well, now I've got it sideways. Teresa, can you pull some of those tables from the packet into the screen share? I don't know if you can do that from how you're set up there, but that would be fabulous if you could. And then Jason last week or last month, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Jason that had questioned what some of the setbacks were with respect to different zones. We've seen some of these issues come up, in not just in these meetings, but even in just some of the community sentiment. And I know not necessarily trying to bend to public clamor, but seen some issues with the new subdivision that's going up off 300 West in off the Island Road there. So this is definitely of interest to the commission, to the citizens in the community, and let's go through this. So Weston, would you mind providing an overview of kind of how these tables how these tables read and with respect to the current setbacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So your first category here is your residential zoning chart. Okay, and so it'll break it up into zones. Your zone categories from agricultural to RM15. And then we just follow the line. So minimum lot area in square feet required for the first dwelling. So in an agricultural zone, 5 acres is required. And we can go all the way down the line. Some of them have little footnotes, and we can follow that footnote down to the notes section just below that, and we can reference what those are. If you look at the next breakdown, the next chart down under where it says principal residential structures, and it says minimum front yard setback. If you see, it's got 2 break lines there. You got minimum front yard setback, and if you follow that along in agricultural, it's 30. But then the next line down says on arterial streets, then the setback would be 40. So that's how you read that.
Okay. So let me turn some time over to you, Jason, and maybe if you want to highlight what your questions have been on this, and maybe what you'd like to explore a little deeper with respect to these setbacks.
I don't necessarily know best place to start. I might take a recommendation from, the professionals that work with this code and stuff every day, and just, give us an idea of what should we be kind of looking at, focusing on. I mean, there's some things I could just take arbitrary guesses at, like lot width. I mean, I could just take a stab at some random topics that I personally am maybe curious about, but what's a way to have a conversation about this? I don't really know the best way to approach the whole. It feels like a lot of topics. I don't know how to set it up.
Yeah, it is. Well, maybe we could start by trying to understand what problem we want to solve. And if it's not broken, then we probably don't need to fix anything. But if there are problems that we're trying to solve, let's identify those and discuss maybe how that can be changed. So, those that have experience with different applicants and different situations and different building permits, and where the code as written doesn't line up with reality and what somebody's trying to do, and they're stuck a little bit. Is there situations like that, or can anyone jump in and help identify what problem we might have that we could be addressing?
Well, and I mean, I think where I brought it up last month was just, I think it was just a random thought of, we were talking about density in the new Valley Vista area, and talking about frontage. The way I think I've seen some house plans, I think it changes when you get narrow. Seems like the way people live have much wider. They want 3rd-car garages, and they want some things that way. And so I think it just jumped out at me as being kind of like narrow frontages and as a topic. But I'm not suggesting that's the way we start off this conversation. I don't know how to start it off or where really to start. But I think that was kind of like a point, if we think we want to pick a point. You know what I mean?
Okay, so
Maybe I can jump in for a second, Mr. Chair.
please.
So in reference to frontages, so let's look at an R110 development, and your minimum frontage is 70 feet. You got a couple different things that you're going to look at on these types of developments. Not only do you have a 70-foot frontage, but you also have a minimum lot width at the setback for 70 feet, and on a corner it's 80 feet. And we do that because the corners have a little bit bigger of a side yard setback that they need to meet. So what this does is allows for curves or cul-de-sacs to have a little bit shorter of a frontage, but almost like a pie shape, open up and meet that 70 feet or 80 feet that's required at the front setback, which is 25 feet in this zone. So sometimes what you'll see is on these lots that are, cut a little weird, you might have a little bit tighter of a front end, and then in the back it gets wide. You'll also see a lot of Mr. Ackett addressed this. You'll see a lot of homes that are built very wide. They meet that full footprint of the home. Most homeowners, or I shouldn't say most, but a lot of homeowners do want to do that. They don't want much of a side yard. They want a rear and front yard, but that side yard, unless it's accessing those spaces, doesn't serve too much of a good purpose. And so that's what you see generally in the R110 and R18 and even the R112 zones.
Thank you for clarifying that. So, Mr. Ackett, just to restate your point, and thank you for the reminder. Your question wasn't last month about the setbacks, but I do recall now you brought up the frontage issue as well. And I think that's something that we can continue this discussion on. Was it both or just the frontage that was of concern to you?
Well, I think one thing that came to my mind was just I think we were looking at it from like a developer standpoint as well, right? Like they like the narrower the better if it's packing people on top of one another. And so I don't really know what angle to approach. I don't know that I necessarily have a question that I'm looking for somebody to solve, right? I think I'm just like trying to just have a conversation I don't necessarily think we've had before about, is there anything we should be considering here that we could be missing, or should anything change, like because of a minimum requirement, does that encourage a certain behavior? And do we want to encourage that? Or do we want to look at frontage encouraging a different behavior, right? Because if you change those minimum frontages, that causes something to occur. Why do we not have it at 100 or 40 or 20, or is it arbitrary? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So just for fun, then let's look at that R110, and the setback, or excuse me, the frontage is 70, but the width at the setback is 80 and 90, depending on inside or corners. And I might need some more help on that. But what that means then, with two side yard setbacks on either side of 10 feet, part of what I heard Weston indicate is people might not need or want that, and 5 feet might be enough. And or if you take that together and say at the setback distance, the minimum width for R110 is 80 for an inside, then the maximum width of the building or the structure is 60 feet. And does 60 feet, in your opinion, I think one of the things you mentioned was, does that give you the options and the variety of building that might make and beautify a neighborhood? And so if that's something that we can think about and adjust here, then it's maybe part of maybe not a problem, but at least something that we could look at. If it had to be a little bit wider, it gives you just that many more options as from an architectural standpoint. And my personal thinking as I drive through a neighborhood is I like to see variety. I like to see all different kinds of houses and not cookie cutter homes, and not drive down a street where every home is, you see the big garage out front, and then the front door is offset to the back. And it's not that that's a bad design. There's a time and a place for it. I just don't want every home in the neighborhood to be identical, and all you see are the garages as you drive down. That's kind of a bias that I openly admit that I have. And it doesn't mean that the people can't build those, but you can control a little bit of that and provide more options when it's wider. So that's an argument, Jason, as I'm thinking about what you're talking about, that could be there. On the other hand, larger zones, could accommodate more of that, but it looks like even for R112 and R120, the minimum frontage is still that same amount. So you could have long, deep lots potentially. So it's a valid discussion. I'd love to hear what other people think of this, and does it warrant making some adjustments potentially to the numbers in this table?
And maybe one question is just, maybe we could start at, somebody had this information to begin with. Where did this information come from? Who did what before this point? How did we get to this information? Maybe that knowledge of that story would give me more context on how to contextualize it.
I can answer that, Mr. Chair.
Please.
These are typically based off of densities. So when we look at our densities and what we allow, referencing our general plan, and we allow specific types of densities in areas, these lot widths, basically it goes through a calculation of how much land is taken out for a public right of way, and the improvements that are needed given the lot sizes, and it breaks it down to specific densities. And so then what we end up doing is having a tiered effect from 5 acres to 1 acre to 20,000 square feet to 12, to give everybody a variety of options. The other thing that you'll see in subdivisions, and it's hard to see this without looking at a plat, but the developer will also vary the lots. They won't have, even if it was just a solid straight road, they won't have, every single lot be 80 feet wide. They will vary those because they will gain different prices based on the depth of the lot and the position. And so there generally is variety throughout the subdivision, given what direction the house faces and the cost that's associated with the type of lot that they'll sell for that. Not to get into all the details of that, but there's some aspects of this that is worked out on the developer side as well.
And just to follow up on that, that doesn't preclude the city from actually, requiring the variations of frontages. I mean, to get that variety, there are some of your less experienced developers that might do that. They might come in and just put everything as close to the same as they can. But those that are more experienced and are shooting for that variety will do exactly what Weston has talked about. And there are some cities that say that the ordinance requires a certain percentage or a certain number of variety of frontages or configurations, again, to try to invite and facilitate those varieties.
And maybe that's more the answer, is something to facilitate the variety. I still have a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. I forget the name of the development that on 300 West, the Garrett Pitcher subdivision. Someone can help me with that for the record. But that was one where there might have been some variety in depth, but variety in width really didn't happen. And so that does kind of limit some of those options as far as frontage. I did some quick math just while you were talking. And, for a 10,000 square foot lot at a 70-foot frontage, if it's rectangular, would be 143 feet deep. And if it's 80 feet frontage, it'd be 125 feet deep. If it's 90 feet frontage, it'd be 111 feet deep. And then if it's 100 feet frontage, obviously it's 100 and 100. So, it feels like there's opportunity, even with some of these rectangular lots, and there is interest for people to have deep backyards, and I like the concept that you mentioned, Weston, with respect, or Steve, sorry, with the variety of configurations. Maybe 70 is, and you can have 70, that's a minimum, but you have to have some varieties. So you've got some 70s, you've got some 90s. Developers, will try to make a development that'll sell, and if that variety is going to sell, then that's great. They're also a for-profit business, and you want to maximize the what they can make on the property, and that's appropriate as well. That's the line of work they're in. And so I think as our job is create constructs that they can operate within that accomplish both. And it creates an aesthetically pleasing neighborhood with variety, and it allows the developers to still have motivation to come in and do these projects.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor first, and then Mr. Bailey.
Maybe you have Steve clarify for us. I'm not sure I ever totally understand it. Under the R110 you're looking at, you got an 80, a 90, and a 70. Those all apply to different situations. I know we got confused on this before. A regular lot inside lot, there's lot 4, 5, and 6 in the middle of the subdivision. I believe it's an 80, not 70. 70s for different designations for that footnote 4 for arterial streets. So most are going to be 80s. The 90 is on a corner lot. So Steve, maybe you could clarify that 80, 90, and 70 concept so that the rest of the council is clear on what those differentiations are between the 80, 90, and 70.
So so basically 70 is if it's in a cul-de-sac, maybe it's on some type of a curve. Any type of a curve where you might not necessarily have the 80 feet of frontage, but by the time you get to the front building line, if it's an interior lot, there has to be 80 feet of width for the lot. And then, as was mentioned earlier, if it's on a corner, then we jump to 90 just because of those different setbacks. And so if you just have a straight road with straight lines, then yes, they could all be 80. So the 70 is just for a road configuration, or perhaps you have a strange piece of property where maybe the old property lines from the neighboring properties came in at an angle, and so they've only left someone with 70 feet of frontage on a straight road just because maybe some bizarre property lines, but they would still have to get to that 80 feet when they hit the front line, that front setback line.
Yeah, so it's 80 feet at the front setback, but the 70 feet still at the actual frontage, the front part of their property.
Where it hits the road.
Okay.
That's on curved lots. Straight lots, it's 80.
Even on a you could have a weird geometrical, one of those geo words. Like I said, where maybe there's a weird property configuration, and even though it's on a straight road, they still could have a 70-foot frontage, but they'd have to get to 80 at the front property line.
So if I can jump in, Mr. Mayor, and ask a quick question about what you're clarifying, because I'm hearing a couple different things. I want to make sure we have it right. I'm hearing that on a straight road, barring the exception just described, that it would be 80. But I'm not seeing, but only on curved roads is it 70, and I'm not seeing where to read that in the table. Where I see the 70 in the table is minimum frontage, and then there's a footnote number 4, and then I'm seeing the 80 and the 90 at setback, but not necessarily the frontage. So I'm confused at when you would be required to have 80 as frontage and not just the setback. for an R110, just as an example.
Well, that would be the case if it were rectangular, if you had, 90-degree angles on each corner. It'd need to be 80-foot frontage on the front, on the minimum frontage, as well as the minimum lot width.
Okay.
Yeah, so typically when we are reviewing these, we will, they typically will, if it's a square lot or a rectangle lot, they'll just meet the 80 or more.
So these wedge-shaped lots, which are what a lot of these are, this accommodates where at any point where we're building a structure, we're going to see 80 feet width at a minimum, even if the actual frontage is 70, because it's not exactly pie-shaped, but a little bit like that. That makes a lot of sense. And we saw, again, if we had that map up, because it's the one that's one of the more recent ones. I don't think we have it handy though, but of the subdivision that I'm talking about, the picture subdivision, it felt like they were all at 70 feet at the frontage, but they'd have the 80 feet and 90 feet as appropriate at the setback. Is in the question. So I'm just, opening this up for discussion's sake. Is the question is that okay? Do we leave things as is? It's working, or what other thoughts as far as, the type of developments that should be allowed? Is there any other constraints we should place on that?
And Mr. Chair, to your point, I think I can put in other words what I was saying to help go with what you're saying. So if we just use the subdivision you're talking about as the case study, there was a lot of pressure from the developer to capitalize on efficiencies in density. And the outcome of that, those homes will be built a certain way because of that density. And that'll give us a very good look at what that combination looks like. If everything is that, then that neighborhood will look a certain way on house widths. And so my question in real life is, do we like that? Do we want to continue? Should we require more frontage for a wider home? Do we want to see wider homes in that type of area, in that kind of neighborhood? Do we want to see more space that way? Or do we want to take some there, but then maybe there's some others you want to give back, right? Like I'm thinking like an RM15 or an RM7 or something on the real small, like maybe that's not needed. Maybe that type of frontage is almost irrelevant at those other zones. Maybe you can give more on that end, or
thank you for clarifying that. Let's hold before commenting there, and I want to go back to Mr. Bailey, who had an earlier comment.
Okay, sure. So it's interesting because Wasatch Shadows is the exact zoning and the exact same standards as Pheasant Run. And you can see that there's variety in both of those. And a lot of that is due to the infrastructure, right? So once they put in roads, if there's not, and the lot that they're developing. So if it's a 10-acre parcel versus a 20-acre parcel, whatever that shape is, our minimum standards are just minimums. And so Wasatch Shadows has wider lots, but that's because they put in more roads. And on this next development, there wasn't adequate room to put 2 roads. And we go through that process in the development stages of a subdivision as city staff, to get the sewer to work and the water and the street needs. And in this case, we eliminated some proposed cul-de-sacs and things like that. But Pheasant Run actually has a variety of lots. On one end, there's smaller lots, and on the other end, there's larger lots. They ended up being deep lots, which some people like. But it's not the developer building to the homeowner's needs unless the developer's building all of the homes. And so one of the nice things we have is that up to this point, most of our subdivisions are also the lots are being sold. So there's a variety of homes because they're all coming in with a different home builder. And if it was a subdivision that the builder, so like in larger communities like in Ivory Homes or something like that, where the developers doing the subdividing plus building the homes, that's where you get more of that tract home look and feel. So I don't have opinions one way or another. I'm just pointing out that we do have variety, and there is a lot of difference in our subdivisions with the same minimum standards that we have. So if you get more restrictive, sometimes we don't get the better product that we think, because every subdivision's unique, and just hate to bring it up, but if you work with a large scale development, sometimes that's your best opportunity to get open space built in and give and take on trails and variety and things like that. But because we're only taking 10 or 15 acres at a time, that's what I view as our challenges. There's just not a lot of room for give and take with the developer.
Yeah, that's great context. I live in the Fox Point subdivision, which was developed and built by a builder, Nielsen Homes at the time. And so they're it's as much variety as you can get in a set of floor plans that you can purchase. But it's interesting for me. What I'm thinking about is variety more than anything else, more than the frontage itself. Referencing those two in the case study, Wasatch Shadows, I think turned out great. I think that's a well done neighborhood. I don't know how the infrastructure is, but as far as driving through it, it feels neighborly, the kind of community that is what I would envision is appropriate to be bringing in. Pheasant Run, time will tell. Maybe they do get built out and it looks just as nice, and I would love to be wrong. But one of the differences on paper, there are more varieties, and I sat down with the mayor, I think last summer when this was coming up, and he showed me the square footage of the lots and the variety, and they were very similar for both those projects. The main difference was because of the depth of a lot of those lots in Pheasant Run, the frontages were narrower. And that's my concern, is does that limit your development options? The developer that chose to purchase that land did exactly that. I remember an argument that was given while we were talking about that. So, well, what am I supposed to do? This long rectangular piece of land I bought, this is about all I can do to develop it with that road down the middle and lots on either side. And my argument is, nobody made you buy that land. Nobody's making you develop it. If you want to buy the land next to it, just like we did last month, where the city council changed some zoning from commercial to multifamily residential, and the argument was made at the time, but somebody else could come in and they're going to buy 2 or 3 adjacent lots and put in something commercial there. Same idea for a residential developer. If they're coming in and they see a piece of land that's available, doesn't mean they automatically have to develop it. If it doesn't meet the standards that we're looking for, they should wait until they get a parcel of land that they can work with, or buy the adjacent property. So I don't want to be hostage to the developer saying, well, this is all I can do with it, so you're stuck with my project. No one's making you develop this piece of land. And so if we can get some variety into it and still have it be encouraging, in a prior life, I mentioned this before, I was a commercial real estate appraiser, and as an appraiser, developers would come to me with their proposed projects on paper, and I would value them for the banks. And so I saw all kinds of subdivisions come in. This was primarily in Salt Lake and Davis counties. But these projects would come in by the dozens of different configurations and what they're looking to do. And you know, they would come back to the drawing board many times based on the marketability of what we were valuing. So I have a little bit of a different perspective when I think of how to turn a profit as the developer. You know, based on that experience. And so when I see a project come in like Pheasant Run, you know, if I were wearing a different hat and the appraiser in that situation, I'd have a challenge with it. Now, of course, he's sold it all out because there's demand in the valley, but it doesn't mean that it's yielding the variety that we want. I like my vision, and it's just, you know, Nathan's vision is that variety throughout, as opposed to having, here's a section of town that's our starter homes, and here's a section of town that's our mid-size homes, and here's a section of town that's our higher end homes. I like, you know, the mingling and everybody together, and kind of the same concept we'll talk about in a bit with mixed use. You know, let's all commingle and not isolate and create these different neighborhoods, you know, based on that. So those are some of my opinions, and, you know, for discussion. And I'd love to get some reaction, because that's where the ideas come from, is through this kind of discussion.
I kind of, if I can, I'd kind of like to piggyback. Ty beat me to the punch here a little bit. When Pheasant Run started coming in, and I remember the discussions about not liking the narrow, deep lots, I sat down and did some math, and I don't feel that there was room to build 2 roads and do a wide, shallow lot. It wouldn't have worked. I remember doing some measuring in like the older parts of town where some of the lots are wider and not as deep. And a lot of it, like Ty says, it has so much to do with the parcel of land. And I think there comes a time when I would hate to see us change something and limit something to 100 feet of frontage. Then we run into a piece of ground where it the width of the property they've purchased different. If we're still doing the 10 acres here, 15 acres here, well, now all of a sudden the property is only wide enough for one road down the middle, but we've limited it to 100 feet of frontage. So you're still going to have these deep lots with 100 feet of frontage, and you've made a less dense area, which some would argue is good, but you're just driving the price up, I feel. I mean, I think these minimum standards are probably good to have as a minimum. And as we work our way out of the city, I think we will probably run into areas where someone's going to go in and want to do a 100-foot wide lot that is shallower, because that's how the ground works out for them to lay their development in that particular piece of ground. And there's also, I think, this maybe a little bit different point of view, and sometimes I worry I'm putting the wrong hat on for these as the city streets department guy. There's part of me I kind of like, if we can, the less roads we can have, they're extremely expensive, not only to build, but also to maintain. And there's more sewer, there's more water, there's all that stuff where, you know, if you have a 70-foot wide, 80-foot wide, there's going to be less. Where if you do 120 foot and you have twice as many roads, a lot of that stuff, you're doubling your infrastructure that needs to be maintained and kept up on.
Thank you for that. One thing that I'm still thinking about is Mr. Garside made a comment about, you know, variety, and the way that I heard that, and maybe it's not what he meant, but I envision a sliding scale, let's say. So if we were looking at, you know, a minimum frontage table, for example, it might be, if it's a development with 0 to 5 lots, you know, they can all be 70. If it's a development with 5 to 10 lots, you know, you can have, you know, 2/3 be 70, and you have to have a third that's 80. And if it's a development that's 15 or 10 to 20 lots, something like that, where you still can have the 70. We're not saying you can't do that, but you can't develop a subdivision with the whole thing being 70. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, thank you. Just some observations. I think that was one of the things that the public mentioned at the rough development was frontages were really small and they wanted to see larger. That's kind of what started this in my mind in the last little bit. And then Pheasant Run, yeah, I interpreted Mr. Garside's comments the same way you did, a variation of sizes, of frontages. I see a couple of second and third order effects here with a small frontage. Okay, everybody's putting in 3-car garages, so therefore you got a wide sidewalk. Now you got minimal on-street parking. And oh, by the way, with these 10-foot side setbacks, where's everybody putting their trailers at? In the street. And then we used to have a big discussion. I don't know if any of you guys were around, but it was a huge thing for a long time, was clear visibility on the sides. Well, now that people pull their trailers in the back and right on the sidewalk, well, guess what? Now they're backing out, and we've created a safety problem, but I guess there's no big deal because nobody's got hit yet. So that's just some observations. I mean, if you got a wider side yard or a wider frontage, you'll have a wider side yard. You can put your trailer back behind your home or the side of your home, and it's not on the sidewalk. Just some observations that I've seen just around town, just to kind of go with the frontage and the side setbacks. Yeah, I like Mr. Guard's sides. I interpret it the same way as you did, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Not everybody maybe wants a large side yard, but if you want to have toys and a trailer, et cetera, and you don't want to go rent an RV storage and you want to leave it at your home, okay, at least put it on the side yard or in the back of the yard. Those homes over in Pheasant Run, you'll be lucky if you get a dump truck back there after it's done. You'll have to rent a skid steer just to get a load of sod back there after the fences are put in. Just a thought on the side setbacks. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Brown. That's a great point with third car garages and RVs and so forth. Other comments on this? What does everyone else feel? Mr. Woods.
We've heard a lot of comments about Pheasant Run and the deep lots and everything, and I like the point that was made that that developers can adapt, and those big long lots are not very pleasing looking, and if we set the standards to make the city the way we would like it to look, developers, they're going to adapt to those things. I mean, at the end of the day, they got a parcel of ground. They're going to try to squeeze as many homes in there, whatever it looks like, how many, 1 road or 2 roads. But I think that this body is on the right track of let's decide that these small developments that was brought up that we're developing 10 acres, 15 acres at a time. And Ty says that we have less choice and less input on these. I mean, it's one road in, 1 road out. But the guys that's writing the check for these developments, they got on their big boy pants when they write that check. And if we set the standards to make it how we would like it, they will figure out a way to do it, just like in Pheasant Run. If them frontages needed to be a little bit wider, they'd figure it out. And the lots might be a little bit more money, but in the end of the day, it's going to be a nicer looking community, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. So great points being brought up. What are other thoughts and comments with respect to the frontage issue and setbacks?
I ask, from a county perspective, how do these line up with the county's zoning and setbacks and frontage requirements?
Great question. Can anyone speak to that? I do not know the answer.
It's a good question. I'm not aware of the county's setbacks. I would assume they're similar. I don't know if Steve knows.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, we could pull up their code, but I think that as you look through different jurisdictions, you're going to see a lot of similarities because they're based on some of those same studies that Weston alluded to at the beginning. I mean, I could look at that really quick and see what it is it says.
The reason that could be applicable here is just looking at future growth of the city as we start to expand out into territory that's not city, into county property, just expanding as a city. You are going to run into, this question at some point: is how do we want to continue to develop? Is this sufficient for that growth that we eventually will get, and does it line up with what's surrounding us? I don't know if there's that big a difference. If there's not, then maybe it won't matter that much, but it'd be good to have some comparisons to see what the county's doing.
And Mr. Reese, are you talking about all projects that could potentially come into the city, or the projects that are immediately adjacent to county property lines?
Well, I think on both, right? I mean, it's going to bring in questions on the road and infrastructure that's going to be required there. So the questions we have now, it's just going to get bigger as we expand.
Thank you.
Well, that should work itself out at some point in this combined effort of our long range plan, right? Isn't that part of it? I would hope. I haven't heard any more on it. Maybe it's that stagnation. I don't know. But.
Yeah, that is one of the things. We're going through that general plan process that we're, we have the same contractor with the county, and that's one of the feedback items we'd like is to see how that buffer zone, or whatever we call it, how that matches up. But as we look at our future growth, it's a lot of that decision making is going to be based on the ability to provide services. So there's just some areas where, we just, if we can't make the sewer work or whatnot, we just don't have, it's not likely that we're going to expand in that direction or for however far that is. And so there's a lot of different factors at play. And so anyway, and just to clarify, when I talked about that other subdivision, I wasn't for or against. I guess my point in reverse is trying to make these minimum standards apply. We try and make codes or zones, and then we have a whole variety of situations and different neighbors and different, things. And I was just trying to throw in the idea that there's also the infrastructure and that side of, as a development comes to life, for another example, that Rupp property, we looked at those, and as staff, we looked at them, and there is no way that concept works, right? Like, no matter what zone you put, there was only, some of those properties only had 20 something feet of frontage. The road concept wasn't 60 feet wide to our standards. And so, you go through that process and you're going to eliminate a road right off the bat just because that was a concept, but it hadn't gone through that next step of engineering. And so, it doesn't ever come out, once you apply all of the different things, it doesn't come out the same. But the other thing I'm hearing is and what I liked about Nathan's comments is not necessarily having this planning concept that we have totally different zones, and that, I don't know how else to say it, but I don't want my zone to touch your zone. Mentality is it. I mean, that is a planning concept, but I agree. We have a lot of areas in the city that have infill. We have, some wealthier people living right next to, older homes, brand new homes being built right next to some of the older homes, and I think that's an advantage of Morgan, is that you know, we don't have these rings of growth with the old being all concentrated and all the new one, the rim or whatever. So that is an interesting concept, and there is a form-based planning approach that would, you know, be a whole different direction and things like that. It's just really healthy discussion, and I will be quiet now. So.
No, I'm glad you jumped in, Mr. Bailey. Appreciate the clarification. One, two, the idea behind you know, having front of mind for us some of the infrastructure considerations is a good thing. We don't always have that perspective, and that's helpful. You mentioned up front that there might be some parts of the city that are less amenable, I guess, to that infrastructure, you know, sewers or what have you. Is that, you know, is that known in the moment once a project's being undertaken, or do we already know that there's certain parts of the city that are kind of untouchable? Or were you referring to, you know, maybe incorporating more county land into the city at some point in the future?
No, we don't. We kind of wait for projects to come to us, but every single project comes and we have a development review meeting, and we say, you know, here's your challenges. The planner gives their, you know, you're going to need this, that, and the other. And then there's some places that we say, you know, the sewer line would either need to be upgraded, or, you know, it just isn't deep enough in that area to make it flow. You know, this subdivision would require a lift station, which we wouldn't support. So it's not that we have an overall, like, this is where we're trying to steer development. The same as like water pressure, right? It's like, no, that's a buildable lot for everything else that works, but we don't have enough capacity for fire flow. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's not, there's no magic to it other than that particular parcel, for some reason, or whatever pipe they're building off of, or their elevation has that limiting factor based on what they're trying to develop. So, you know, sometimes it's, I want to do a, you know, divide this into 3 homes, and the engineer says, well, you only have enough fire flow for one, or you don't even have fire flow. You're going to have to upgrade, you know, this half of the city system in order to achieve that. And so those are the type of conversations that we have as in our development review meetings, you know, before we even get to some of these other look and feel type discussions. And at some point they all come together and we end up with, you know, the best thing we can. And anyway, just really appreciate your guys' discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I saw another hand. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Garside.
I was just going to answer Justin's. Teresa and I both jumped on the county's code. You got to really, the county, the smallest lot that they will allow is a full acre, and for their full acre, it's 200 feet of frontage, and then you jump to 5 acres, and it's 250 feet of frontage, and so.
Steve, what about subdivisions though? Would they be different? I mean, that's general county would be the acre, but would they have setbacks different for subdivisions?
Yeah, I didn't.
And would they be?
Yes, they would be, correct.
Yeah, would probably be more similar to ours.
Exactly. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then they also throw in a well protection that you almost need another 1/4 of an acre in the county to make that all work out.
Mr. Ackett, let's see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in again on that too. Like, I really like that idea of varying densities with how they can intermingle, and with not almost intermingling the more like like a dot graph instead of like hard lines. You know what I mean? I think you see that in broader scope, like Farmington Station has evolved into another area of homes and businesses. And I think areas can be allowed to do that. And if we force it to all be in one central area, then it kind of goes to what Ty was saying, is something has to get old and then something will be newer. And so I don't think our current maps really allow for that to happen. Like, let's just say there was a new, let's say there was more pressure around a different area. I think the one area that would be a good descriptor would be like over by the soccer fields at the high school. That feels to me to be like a low density area, like more of a neighborhood kind of thing. Bigger lots, kind of like the homes that are already over there. But to me, in functionality, I think to myself, well, it's right by a school, and it's right by Commercial Street. And when there's a building there, when there's a bridge there, it'll be highly accessible. So in some regards, to me, that could be very much high density area right there. And so does our code, for our code to allow and kind of map, I guess, maybe the zones to map a more interactive zoning, I guess. I don't know how to really word that, but maybe you could get to understand what I was saying about that, those kind of coming together. I think seems realistic to me. And then, and I like the conversation also about the viability of the services. Maybe the services that are provided dictate some of that zoning as well, if you know that service can't be provided, or is it just a function of the way that it's utilized? If the entire city were able to be completely completed in 1 year from now, we had all the resources available, we could build everything and have it done in 1 year, is there a real true issue with water supply to a certain area, or is it because of the nature of how you get there over time with property ownership changing and developing? Do you just creep out there? If we could do it instantaneously, what would it look like versus us growing there? If we could see that like long-term vision of, I'd be interested if there are those same limitations if we got it all right now. Does that make sense, Ty? Am I way off the radar here?
Sort of. Based on what we have now, water supply is adequate. We're using about half of the water that we have resource, but with some upgrades to tanks and things like that. So you kind of have to grow into that, right? Sewer is right now adequate. There's some sections of town where we have to flush the line just to get it to function, because there's not enough development on that line. So there's no real magic, I guess, to saying this is where we're at, and let's just build tomorrow and have it be done. You have to grow into a lot of it, and then a lot of that pressure, a lot of that give and take, and the pains of growth is, at some point a development says, hey, this is what I want to do, and you say you have to upgrade half of that side of the city in order to make that happen. One will say forget it, and at some point the pressure is so, the demand is so great that they say, yeah, we'll do that. We'll build a whole other water tank and a whole other system in order to develop that area, and it happens. So it's just we just have to be kind of comfortable, I think, just growing into what happens in the long term as far as infrastructure is concerned. But
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, and for your comments, Mr. Ackett. What I'd like to do at this point is determine some next steps. What we want to do with this discussion. I think we've had some good dialogue this evening. We could go on for a lot longer, I'm sure. And if it's appropriate, we can entertain additional relevant comments. But what I'd like to maybe do at this point is create a few assignments that we can take to progress this conversation and continue the discussion in future meetings. And part of that would be let's look at some of the code in other jurisdictions that have those stipulations that Mr. Garside referenced, with the variety, maybe the sliding scale of frontage in residential developments. See what that even looks like. Maybe there's so I don't know, Weston, if that's something that you could research or look for us to come together for our next meeting, if that's you or who you might recommend.
Yeah, that's something I could do. I would have a couple questions just to direct my research, if now's the time to ask that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just to kind of focus the effort, is the goal in this to diversify the lot sizes, 5 and 10 feet wider than what they are? So some of them are 80, some of them are 70, some of them are 90. Is that the goal? Is the goal to increase the subdivisions to have some larger lots? Is the intent to say we're okay with 70-foot frontages, and if we just average 80-foot frontages, whatever zone we're talking about, and if we just averaged those across all of the subdivisions, if they all had an average of 80 feet, is that sufficient? And that would give them flexibility to say some are bigger, some are smaller, and that's stuff that we can bring up later, or is it really a push to we're concerned about the size of these lots and we want to increase them, and so this is a good way to do that? I just want to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, good clarification. I think it comes back to that opening comment I'd made around what problem are we trying to solve. And we didn't really get a clear answer. I've heard both use cases that you just described. One bigger lots, one wider lots, and you can have both. For me, how I would summarize it, and this is just my perspective, is I'd summarize it with the answer of variety. Doesn't mean it's all one or all another, but giving options to the development. And as long as there's options, development options for whichever builder someone brings to the table, that they can, do this or that, and different purchasers can choose different lots based on what their needs are, and you get a community that looks diversified, whether that's because they're wider or whether that's because they're bigger. Either or accomplishes that purpose to me, and to me the purpose is variety.
And then just FYI, going to the county's residential ones, their R120 is 100 feet, their R112 is 90, R18 and RM7 and RM15 are 70.
Those are the RM zones. Yeah. 70. Okay.
But they're two single family. I mean, the two smaller single families are 90 and 70 respectively. So it's comparable.
Just Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one more point. I appreciate what you had said on variety, and just one more point of clarification. Is it variety specifically we're talking about lot sizes, or is there a perception that we'll get variety in housing by increasing or decreasing the lot sizes?
Well, I think that's a hypothesis.
Right. I mean, and that's honestly my concern is if we're thinking that we're going to increase the lot and get a different house, that very well may not be what happens. So I just want to make sure that we understand that it would be variety in size of lots, not necessarily homes.
Yeah, I agree that something could go in and it's same throughout the neighborhood, but that's the choice of the owner, and they chose that, as opposed to their choices become much more limited if the configuration of the lot only enables certain types of homes. And having a lot that has a limitation, and another lot that's more flexible, and another lot with a limitation. I like that sliding scale type of model that Mr. Garside alluded to. To me, that's something I'd love to see if there's a jurisdiction that has something like that in place, and be interesting to know how that's working for them.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So using Pheasant Run as example, I'm just sitting here thinking about this. Comments have been made of how deep the lots are, and that they just seem so deep and not very pleasing, not very functional. So my question, I guess, to Weston, to whoever can answer, is increasing the frontage, is that going to solve the engineering problem of the deep lots? So we're talking about the width, but at the end of the day, it's a parcel of ground and with one road down it. So what, I guess my question would be, engineering question is, if we increase the widths of those lots and make them a little bit different, what is that going to solve the depth problem, or if any?
It won't. It's a good question, but that really is tied to the placement of the utilities and the orientation of the lots and the size of the property, is where that really comes into play.
And Mr. Brown.
Yeah, if I may, again, using Pheasant Run as an example, I mean, there are deep lots, and they did the curvature road allows for different lot sizes. But if you apply Mr. Garside's or Weston's approach to the front edge, either an average or a sliding scale, then you've got a longer lot. And every third lot or every fifth or whatever actually has a wider lot. And then me as the consumer, I go, wow, you know what? I can use this lot I like this deep lot because I can get some stuff along the side. At the Weston's point, I'm probably going to still build the same house, but I might offset it left or right, giving me a larger side yard on one or the other. And now I can access the back and I can utilize that whole backyard and feel very comfortable about it. But as it is, they're all the same frontage, and you're like, okay, do I want a deep lot or do I want a short lot? You know, how much grass do I want to mow? It's not how much. Anyway, it gives some variety, as the chair's asking for, to use one of those two frontage appropriations, if you will, to allow, again, some variety and usage of a deep lot. It may be on the shorter lot, you don't want a lot, you want a small side yard. Maybe on deep lot, you're like, hey, I can use that. I can build me a shop in the back or whatever, and I can drive a big truck back there or whatever, or my RV or my toy hauler or whatever the case may be. But they're all the same. Then we're having this conversation, in my opinion.
I like the idea that it encourages variety, because the reality is people want the variety. We're all different. Look at our conversation. We're all having different we're all having different thoughts, right? And so I just like the spirit of encouraging variety, to be honest with you. I think that I like that.
Thank you. The other assignment, did I see another hand? Mr. Dixon, go ahead.
Thank you. To that point, I just drove by some homes the other day in Saratoga Springs, Eagle Mountain, and there were miles of homes that looked identical. Every single house was cookie cutter, same width, same garage, same everything. And it's like the only way you knew you had a different home was by the number on the front. So I certainly hope we don't have that here in Morgan. I hope we don't see that. I like the variety and want to add to that comment. I think one thing that was mentioned a little while ago, cul-de-sacs. I've seen a couple of problems with that in the past, in that you just don't have much room to park vehicles, and also when the snow plows come, they don't. And this going to Lance, I'm sure, but they just have to pile it up there in one of the spots, and then you've got a mess all winter. So you can't really utilize that space as well. I've seen that as a problem in a few of our areas that we've got.
Thank you for those comments. We lived for a time in Phoenix in one of those cookie cutter neighborhoods, and we used to joke that the only way you could tell which house is yours is push the garage door opener, and whichever one went up, that was your house. Let's see, the other assignment I was thinking of, Mr. Bailey, you had referenced, based on part of what I was talking about too, but having not mixed use as far as mixing commercial and residential, but mixed kind of zones. And I don't even know what the term for that is. It seems like, well, back when I spent more time with this, there was a term called New Urbanism, the Congress for New Urbanism. And I don't know if that's still a thing, but at the time it was advocating, that methodology or philosophy was advocating for the type of thing you're talking about. And so I guess the question is that still a thing? And if that's something that maybe, you could look at what in practicality, what that looks like as far as a zone that would allow for, that building capability.
Yeah, and I think from the attorney's standpoint, we would be looking for intentional, enforceable variety language that allows that variety to be forced because we want it, and enforceable if you don't do it, and we don't see that in the outcome, right?
Thank you. So if you're comfortable with that, those are the two thoughts I was thinking of. And then maybe the third, Jason, since you inspired the discussion in the first place, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just over the next month as you're driving through neighborhoods and maybe making note, and we can all kind of do this, but Jason in particular, making note of the variety, the lot sizes, the way that development fills, and is that the kind, if you have examples and pictures or anything that you could share, that might be helpful. So if we can have those three assignments, I'd like to move to our next conversation. And I know we're an hour and 20 minutes in, so I want to be conscious of our investment of time tonight. But I'm ready to move to the next section if everyone else is okay doing that. All right, seeing a couple heads nod and thumbs up. So we'll close this discussion for now. We'll continue it in further meetings once we have additional information to react to. Item number 2 is a discussion that's been, I don't know if the official term is continued, but we at a point in time about a year ago were exploring, maybe it's even a year and a half, might have been before COVID, but we were exploring introducing mixed use zoning within within the city. And mixed use meaning having both commercial and residential in the same parcel, and in the same areas, and what that looks like. So it can be, the stereotype that comes to mind when I think mixed use is having, if I think about Commercial Street, where you might have a retail establishment on the ground level and then residential units above on levels 2 and 3, for example. Now that's not the only way that mixed use can present, but that's what comes to mind. So the conversation was to think about that, and back then, just to set the context, we had a number of pictures that we'd looked at. I brought some pictures from different developments, comparing Denver, for example, and what mixed use looks like there to Fort Collins. And very different style and feel, and Morgan fits more into the Fort Collins model, and so we reviewed some of those, but there were other, I forget some of the other pictures. We can pull back up those notes from those sessions, but I'd like to open it up just for a minute and maybe determine where we want to go with this. And Mr. Bailey, if you wouldn't mind, tying this in with some of the conversations going on with the general plan. And it looks like, sorry, just saw a chat pop up. Looks like, you have a PowerPoint presentation, Weston. Does that sound right?
I do. It's brief, but it also includes Mr. Wood's pictures as well. So we can go through that whenever you're ready.
Yeah, let's jump into that.
Okay.
Well, actually, first, before jumping into that, I don't know if it addresses what I just asked about the general plan. If it does, then carry on. If not, if Mr. Bailey can comment on that briefly before we go into the presentation.
Yeah, we can have Mr. Bailey address that topic, and then I can continue.
Sure. So that's just part of some of the feedback we're looking for in the general plan update process. There's focus groups. They're doing a lot of different types of public input, but that's one of the questions we have is some of the zones that we currently don't have available. If the recommendation is going to be to adopt some, and if so, where. I don't think we're going to get to the level of like design, look and feel, as it's just a general plan level thing. So I think this is still healthy decision or healthy discussion, in the planning commission. So we have more of an outcome. We know what we're looking for, what the options are available to us.
Can we
But
afford,
anyway, that's kind of where we're
can we
at.
afford look and feel? That'd be awesome. Can we afford that? Look and feel?
All right.
Sorry,
I
I didn't catch what he said exactly, but
I don't know that I did either.
Anyway, that's just kind of where we're at. I'll just give my 2 cents. It's kind of like the same discussion you had with variety. Right now, our commercial and residential zones are totally separate. Commercial depends on rooftops. So, a lot of people are just simply saying until you have a certain population, there's a limited amount of retail or that sort of thing that is feasible. Commercial is really risky, but we have such a high demand for housing. I think it's one option or one way to use the demand on housing in order to preserve or even create additional commercial potential in the future. And just in a lot of areas, it's just a good use of space, really, whether it's vertical or, kind of cluster side by side type developments. But anyway, that's just an opinion.
Thank you for the opinion and the context. Go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, so when this came up last time, I was not with Morgan, so I had started just after this conversation. So I don't know the full details of what hasn't been discussed, but we also have new planning commissioners. So this could be a very basic overlay, but I thought it'd be a good starting point or a restarting point. I wanted to talk about what really is mixed use development. What do we see? We often have a picture of maybe something more urban than Morgan is for mixed use, but that doesn't necessarily translate to what mixed use often comes out to be. So mixed use really is a blend of commercial, residential, cultural, institutional, and even industrial uses where appropriate. It does offer a greater variety of housing. It does increase density of housing, but in that variety, it's also intended to be a variety of ranging and pricing. It's not necessarily increased density for cheap housing. Sometimes that increased density provides some really nice quality units. When you're dealing with location, that adds a lot. Reducing distances between housing, workplace, retail businesses, and other destinations. Obviously, not going to have all of those, but as we bring more into it, it becomes a better mixed use development. Encouraging more compact development as we build out mixed use. It does encourage more compact, which helps to one of Lance's points where he talked about the increase in infrastructure. More compact developments don't have as big of an impact in building out new development or new infrastructure. It strengthens neighborhood character when we're dealing with when we're dealing with mixed uses. Typically, the design is heightened. It's critically looked at and hashed over, and so what we end up with is generally a good-looking project that adds to the city. And they also promote pedestrian connection, bicycle connection, and a healthier environment. So I just wanted to go through a couple aspects of mixed use and what mixed use can look like. When we're adding mixed use to an area, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're adding a building that has multiple uses in it. So this is a townhome project that's in Layton, and this first floor is it's a live work unit, and there's 5 or 6 of these buildings in this townhome project that they did, and 2 of them have these live work units. They're set up so that they can function as a living space if the owner wants, or that they could use it as an office. It's a good functionality to put into a commercial area, but I don't expect there to be a heavy amount of commercial users here. But it does provide some opportunities. The other things that you're going to see is location, placing these residential units in commercial corridors. Basically, not always do you have a reason to put in more commercial, but you do have a reason to put in more rooftops to support those commercial centers that Ty had already talked about. And so when we're looking at mixed use, sometimes is that the right density of housing near that commercial corridor to provide the mix of uses that we're really looking at? So I just wanted to provide a couple examples. This is Bountiful. They've got a very nice mixed use main street. They do have apartments above. They have offices above. This was a plan that they worked out, I believe in 2012 is when they really started going strong on this. This is a development in Clearfield. Now, size and scale obviously would change for Morgan, and even design. You could look at this and say that you're not, a fan of the monotone colors, but what it does provide is active uses on the front. There's a gym there in the morning that people are actively using, and there's a lot of apartments or condos there that provides support for the commercial retail along Main Street. Okay, so I just wanted to give a context of a little bit of mixed use. So this is a section of Layton. There's Target and Lowe's. You might be familiar with this area. Identified some schools. So one of the mixed use areas that Layton has put in is a townhome project that is right adjacent to commercial. These types of developments are important, but when we're dealing with them, we also want to make sure that we're not closing them off, that we're providing access to these commercial type developments, that it's not walling them off, but it is creating accessibility to those commercial areas, and so that we're really providing connection through the area. Another one is an apartment complex that's just behind Target. These are both areas that struggled for a very long time in the Layton area to gain any traction, and have done really well in a residential format. Okay, so these are just some images that were, I believe these are Wes's images. So I just wanted to go through them, and I don't necessarily want to go through them too fast, but I want to give everybody the option to look at these, and we can come back to them. As you're looking at these, look at context. Some of these are going to be more dense than others. So the scale of what we would see in Morgan is obviously going to be lower, but we might end up with, a little bit higher densities in some areas. It's also a very strong interaction with the street. You see a very strong pedestrian connection. These are typically very pedestrian friendly. That looks to be Ogden. Buildings right up to the street, very wide sidewalks. And this is a very, it's a shift. It's a shift in design. It's a shift in thought process where do we park? You know, do we build interior walkable malls? Do we have buildings built right up to the street? Do we have urban centers that we focus this type of development in just specific pocket locations? Is this a standard that needs to be applied throughout the city? I'm not necessarily saying one way or the other. I'm just putting up some ideas out there. So that's the last image. So I'll end and turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. It's super helpful. Appreciate the preparation coming into it. It's been a while since we talked about this, so this is a good refresher and timely with respect to our general plan and what we're looking to do. It looks like some of those pictures might be the ones from Fort Collins. So Wes, I don't know if those are yours or if that's Fort Collins, but it looks like Fort Collins. Just so we have the right location referenced. With respect to next steps here, then, you know, we have some options as we continue to work with the general plan, as we look at what we want and where we want it within the city. Do we create ordinances that allows for certain types of mixed use, let's say within the central business district or in the, you know, along Commercial Street or, you know, down Trojan Boulevard, you know, what's appropriate and what type. So I want to open it up just for some initial reactions and thoughts. We're not going to spend a lot of time delving into the concept tonight, but rather reintroduce this as an important planning principle that there's interest in introducing and allowing within the city, and get some perspective on that and maybe understand where we go from here.
Hey, Wes, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So in those examples you provided, say in Layton, did the city designate those particular zones for mixed use, or that higher density housing, or do they allow it to be more open and let the developer decide? How narrow did they define that to encourage that to work?
Yeah, two of those developments are a townhome development that allows for commercial. Not all the townhomes produced in that zone have to have commercial, but it does allow for some commercial. And the other one, the apartments, is a specific mixed use zone. But both of them do specifically cater to being in a town center.
And meaning that when the city designated that, the planning commission or the city council designated that zone specifically for that, it wasn't giving the developer the ability to kind of move it in a different direction. It was very specific by the city.
Well, actually, all of the projects that came forward were different zones, and developers all came with general ideas and asked, you know, where they could go with it. Staff directed them based on the general plan, directed them to the zones that would be most appropriate, which are the zones they ended with.
What other reactions? Mr. Woods, saw your hand.
One comment I made this when we brought this up a year or so ago. I think a great place to start with this is where this mixed use is going to begin and end. Like, if we're going to take it down State Street, we're going to end the zone at Young Street, and are we going to take it to, of course, probably down Commercial Street, of course, but any of the side streets? How far out of that main street are we going to want this general plan to establish this mixed use? To begin with, it's going to, over the years, I'm sure it's going to evolve, but I think that my only comment right now is just establish where it starts and ends in the city to get a good idea of what we're dealing with.
I like that. I have an opinion. I like what you recommended. If we're setting some parameters, State Street from Commercial Street to Young Street, commercial street from the intersection of State Street to the end of where commercial might be. And then it was proposed for future along the river, for the riverfront potential future development to encourage, where you might have, a riverfront walk and a restaurant or big patio, residential units above that, or what have you. To me, those are some initial thoughts as far as if we're going to say some wheres. Those seem to make sense to me.
And currently, the only place that you have it in your code is in the historic overlay zone.
Thank you.
So Nate, I think it's important in all of the discussion to remember that there's a force out there that we don't have control over, and that's called a market. If those market forces are going to dictate somewhat how those properties are used, and I think there's an example for example, in one of the Dakotas, the North and South, where the city said, here's a mixed use zone, and it developed into a residential neighborhood, but yet at the very end of the neighborhood was still a parcel of property that was either a retailer or a big box or maybe a gas station or something, said, I want to put my business there. And the residents were up in arms because, no, this is a residential neighborhood. So I think there's some danger in just saying this is up front, this is a mixed use zone as designated. It may not develop the way you had expected or wanted it to develop.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. Thank you. And I think we've seen to a small extent that happen with the commercial zone along where, Parkside Lanes and the apartments and that area, we've seen that persist as a residential use predominantly, even though it's been allowed for commercial. It just hasn't taken off, as you say, based on the market forces. And I think that's a really powerful comment. Thank you.
And you take a Farmington Station. I don't know the details, but my suspicion is that the developer had to go through some zoning changes to get the area zoned the way he wanted it. It didn't. I doubt there was, and maybe Steve or Weston, you would know, but I doubt there was a parcel of land that was just perfect for that developer to build what he did in that area. So, the point being is, again, that was driven by the market. It all came together to say this is a good place for this, but the city would have come along and said, okay, we'll help with changing the zoning so that it'll work out, rather than just saying, here's a big area that can be mixed use.
One area that comes to mind with that too is that interior block where 7-Eleven is, I know that's all privately owned, and then a couple developments, some new townhomes I think just went up by the laundromat, and then the Kimball home was kind of built in the interior, which is perfectly allowable on the one hand. On the other hand, it's unfortunate. that's prime real estate to maybe explore some of these concepts. But I feel I saw someone about ready to speak up when I jumped in, so feel free to comment.
No, I was just going to say Farmington Station was in a large part a city development. So that was a city-backed project working with a developer using tax increment financing where the city got paid back. And then they just expanded that for housing on the other side of that development. So
actually the city won't see money from that for a long time. They had a lot of backing from the county as well. So there was a lot of tax incentivized activity on that one.
Mm-hmm. But again, the point being is that the project was there before the zoning, and again, because of market forces coming into play.
Yeah, and new potential with a tracks station.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
that just changed the whole dynamic, right? So, I'll go ahead and make a comment. And one of the concerns I look at is right there where you got two 4-acre parcels right next to each other. One's commercial, one's RM15, commercial general. And anyway, that whole, you know, there's 8 acres there, about 8 acres that could turn into it's just interesting. One's one zone, one's the other. And a mixed use on both of those properties could probably generate a better outcome overall, instead of just a magic wall where you got apartments on one side and commercial where they're 2 separate parcels. And right there where somebody mentioned, the bowling alley and the apartments, I don't think those are 2 incompatible uses. I've never heard any complaints from residents there, but yeah, that whole section of town, just having some options. And then I think just doesn't have to be necessarily above. I don't believe. I think next to each other is just as valuable. One of the things in the pictures I saw is a lot of those developments were straight up, and most of them were three-story, which I kind of see in Morgan having some separation between buildings, not necessarily one big row of buildings with commercial mixed in somewhere, but we can get to all the details later. Then just another general thing is all the way down Young Street. At the end of Young Street, when we build that bridge, I think that changes the dynamic and use of Young Street. Right now it's used pretty much for 100% school, but as that connects back to Commercial Street, I see that being more of a commercial loop in the future, just because of the capacity and size of that road. Young Street's a really, a lot of communities have like for example, a north-south road, but they don't have a good east-west. And having Young Street incorporated into State Street makes more of a loop, or just for traffic flow. I'm not necessarily talking just land use, but
didn't the school already acquire that?
What's that?
I thought the school was trying to acquire all that ground right there, 8 acres or 9 acres.
So the school has property behind the homes. There's 24 acres right there that's still not the school's. It's in private hands. That right now it just shows.
But that's what I thought they were trying to get a major slice of that. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's but just along Young Street, whatever at least fronts the road, I think is another commercial opportunity, whether it's mixed use or commercial, but not necessarily strictly residential, just because of the proximity to Commercial Street and the capacity on Young Street. But those are my only.
Thank you. So here's what I'm thinking at this point, and I'd love to, like I said, entertain any other relevant comments. But I'm kind of thinking, it feels like there's a general consensus that this is a good conversation to not just continue, but to codify and determine where we go from there. And so from that standpoint, understanding the next steps, and that's where I'm struggling is what are those next steps? A lot of times, what I've always said is, if you don't know what the next steps are, that is the next step, is to spend the time to outline those. And that's kind of what I'm thinking needs to happen is maybe between now and the next time we talk about this, we have a more clear path as far as what steps and what has to happen to take these ideas and determine the whys and wheres and whens and codify it, and put that see if before the city council and so on. So that's what I'm thinking at this point, is to get our final comments, but then wrap up, and then I want to take this away and I'll take the assignment to partner with city staff to maybe get a more formal outline of what the next steps are and where we go from here. I did see Mr. Woods with a hand up. Go ahead.
Um, for me, the questions I'm asking myself, are we trying to control growth or are we trying to attract business with this zoning? Are we, is our attempt to slow it down a little bit? Or are we trying to control the growth? Are we trying to attract businesses to Morgan with this opportunity to buy these frontage properties and maximize the dollars of a developer? I mean, like I've said before, if you're the guy that's building the business in the bottom floor with limited traffic to your company, to have something on the top to offset your cost of that building. So I guess my question going forward is, are we controlling growth? Are we attracting business to Morgan?
I hate to be a broken record here, but for me, it's not about controlling growth as far as if we're using the word controlling as limiting. To me, it's more guiding growth, and if we can attract a good tax base that's healthy, that fits with the culture of the city and what we're looking for as a community, I think that's appropriate. I tend to skew more on the growth side, for the reason being, my argument for that's not because I want to see this become a huge city. It's because a comment that I made in our general plan conversation was that all healthy things grow. And you see cities that are vibrant, that they're growing. You see cities that are stagnant and they're deteriorating because they're shrinking and people are moving out and businesses are closing down, and healthy things grow. And that's true for plants and humans and cities, in my opinion.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Just as I've been listening and as far as giving a path forward, I think there's three general, so there's not one ordinance that we could write. I mean, I guess we could include it in one ordinance, but in general, there's not one ordinance that we could write that would encompass real good mixed use. It's going to come in a multifaceted approach. And we can, like you said, we can talk about this further in other meetings, but I generally see some level of increased design for townhome standards that would function in a more walkable format. Not that the current standard wouldn't be permitted, but that if you're going to be in a mixed use environment, something that would be more walkable. Some level of commercial and industrial flex, where you have light tech industrial users that aren't emitting odors or sound or producing issues that can flex in commercial spaces. That's a good mixed use to look at. And then also just in general, a mixed use building, how that would look and the kind of code. I think all those three are really good items to look at separately, and obviously a little bit together, but delve into individually and can take plenty of time in and of themselves. And so it could be a piecing out as we go along.
Thank you for that. We should have that captured in our notes, and I'll take that away. I think during the month I'll set up some time to stop by and the city and meet with. I don't know when you're up here, but we could have a phone call too and kind of flesh that out a little bit more.
Sure.
And prepare for the next conversation. Any final thoughts? I'm kind of not seeing as many hands go up. Let's conclude that part of our agenda. I appreciate the fact that we've been here now almost 2 hours, and we've talked about some things that this is the work that creates the future of the city. We can only handle public issues that come in and applicants and how that stacks up with land use against the current code and never change anything. And all we're doing is kind of transactional processing. the work that we're doing tonight, even though it's long and tedious and we all have other things that we could be doing, is the type of work that changes the city. And hopefully, if we do it right, for the good. And I just want to thank you all for your patience going through this process, because it does take time to do that. And thank you for that. Our last item and grand finale is some training. And I'm not sure if that's you, Steve, that's prepared with that, but let me turn the time over for training.
Well, I don't know. Like you said, we've been going for a couple hours. I don't know that there's anything pressing. I think that, like you said, this has been a good discussion. And this is where we talked about the Planning Commission looks to the future, makes the recommendations. You have to be humble enough to not have pride of authorship, as the city council then refines that plan. And sometimes it doesn't look like anything that you sent to them. But you have to understand that this is kind of like you're planting the seeds. It might be harvested just a little bit by little bit, and it might not come to fruition for a long time, but you said this is the crucial part. And so I think that, like I say, with the lateness of the hour, we can go ahead and put this, unless there's something urgent, we can put this on our next agenda.
Let's do that. I'm in favor of that when we're fresh and can absorb the training. So let's just plan on that. That brings us to the end of our agenda. So let's go ahead and adjourn for the day. Thank you, everyone.